Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. In 106 days, it becomes real. That's when the first obligations under the PPWR will apply, including the EU Declaration of Conformity. And that's exactly what today is about. Welcome to our webinar, EU Declaration of Conformity Made Practical, Templates and PPWR Articles 5 to 12 Explained. Many of you have already heard a lot about PPWR, but today is about making it more practical, because the key question is, what do you actually need to do and how do you do it efficiently? In the next hour, we will therefore focus on three things: what the EU Declaration of Conformity really requires, what information needs to be included, both in the declaration and in the technical documentation, and a clear practical walkthrough of the main articles, which will start applying in 2026. And most importantly, how you can manage all of this in a structured, digital, and automated way. Before we get started, we'd like to understand where you stand today. So you will now see a short question on your screen. Please select the answer that best reflects your situation. So how prepared is your organization to handle PPWR declarations of conformity at scale? We wait a little bit until everyone has voted. Okay. Thank you for your participation. So we see most of you feel partially prepared. And that is what we typically see, is that the real challenge is not only understanding the requirements, but mainly managing the process, the data, and the supplier input at scale. And that's exactly what we'll focus on today. Our speaker today, our presenter, is Siddharth Bagri, Managing Director of PackIntelX. He brings many years of hands-on experience in recycling systems and packaging compliance, and he'll guide you through the requirements step by step and show how to move from manual effort to a structured and automated workflow. And just a quick note on questions: you can submit anytime your questions using the Q&A function. That's the small speech bubble with a question mark, and we collect them and address them at the end. And with that, I hand over to you, Siddharth.
Very good morning to all the participants here. It's actually good to see that that most of us are right now in the direction of partially prepared, because if you were fully prepared, then you wouldn't be here. And I think it's not so easy to be fully prepared, because there's still some unclarities from the EU, from the regulation, from national authorities, from PROs. So I think it will be an ongoing process in the next 3 to 4 months, where we will have to be updated with what's happening in the EU, what's happening in the news, and what are the statements being made by the PROs. Right? But very glad to welcome you to this, I think, third webinar session from PackIntelX on EU DOC. We have to say that every time we go ahead with our, let's say, with the explanation of PPWR, we get a strong interest. And I think this time we have colleagues from more than 11 countries in the EU, and also 2 countries from outside the EU participating today. So very glad to see that we are not just brand owners and manufacturers, but we are also suppliers who are participating in the call. And we'll be focusing a lot on technical documentations, on EU DOC and how to take action in 2026. Yeah. Yulia, just help me confirm if you see my screen after I share it. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
But it's not the presentation. Yeah, now.
Perfect. Great. So a few words on what we do at PackIntelX. So we have two businesses. One of our business is digital solutions, which is what we are also going to discuss a bit more in depth today. So we strongly focus on automatization, digitalizations for PPWR and packaging compliance. We have a very strong platform where manufacturers, brand owners, as well as suppliers can engage to generate, to manage their packaging data, recyclability, EPR, EU DOC. So it's an all-in-one platform, which is growing very strongly since the last few months. Our second business is the operational solutions. So this is where we actually work with waste management, recycling, sorting. Just to give a brief overview, our team is not just software developers. Although I'm from India, I'm also not a software developer. I am coming from packaging market, and I have worked in the packaging, waste management, recycling industry over the last years. Yulia is coming from EPR, and similarly, most of our colleagues are coming from packaging side. And that's why in the operational solutions, we work with chemical recyclers, mechanical recyclers, PROs on actually doing sorting, recycling. And that's where we bring our expertise from operations to digital. Our team behind PackIntelX, it's not easy to put all the colleagues with faces on a sheet of, let's say on a slide, but we have a strong team with colleagues of different expertise, all bringing together in packaging side, on sales, marketing, software development, and legal advising. Our legal advisor sits in Hamburg with 30 plus years experience, and let's say we are quite international as a team. Yulia, I'd also request you to go a bit more in depth at the end on Interpack. Right now, just to briefly touch it, we'll be present in Interpack as an exhibitor starting from 7th of May, and we have been featured in quite many number of magazines, especially because of our digital solution. And we recently held an event, the PPWR Summit at the end of March, where we had multiple speakers from different countries, different expertise, sharing their view on PPWR, which was very well received. Now coming to the main topic, PPWR. Is it a regulation or a bureaucratic storm? I rather say that it's a bureaucratic monster, because this regulation was written in a hurry, and when the regulation came out, there were so many unclarities that every month we get something new, either from the EU or from associations or from the national regulations, right? So what we know about the PPWR and what will definitely not change, number one, is that it applies to all the packagings placed on the market, regardless of the material, product type, and industry from 12th August 2026. Second point is that it's an EU-wide harmonization. It means that this regulation is going to impact all the EU, all the countries present in the EU at once. And number three is that this regulation is going to increase lots of bureaucracy for us. So it's not going to make our lives easy. Unfortunate at a time where we actually should be focused on saving costs and should be focused on, let's say, increasing our businesses. That's where we are getting this bureaucratic regulation. That's the reality, and we'll have to focus a lot on data management, on compliance, getting the supply chain together. So this is the direction where the EU is going, not just with packaging, but also with other regulations. So if you're working with different regulations, you'll realize sooner or later that's where we have to focus on building a good connection, communication with the suppliers, having a full transparency, and really good data management. These are the different articles that are going to impact us in PPWR. Each article in the regulation is a major topic in itself. Yeah. So we can go step by step into each article very briefly, but today our target is to focus on 2026. That's why we are not going to go very detailed in all the articles. Article 5, substances of concern in packaging. This is something we'll be discussing in detail because this is very relevant for 2026. This article is to ensure that there are no heavy metals or PFAS above the prescribed limits from the EU. So if a packaging is placed above these limits of heavy metals and PFAS, then that packaging will be considered non-compliant. Yeah? And to be very honest, there is quite some packaging which contains these chemicals, and there needs to be a strong control in place to ensure that they are below this limit. So we'll be discussing that in detail. Article number 6 is recyclable packaging. Recyclable packaging is extremely important for the whole PPWR because this is one article which will have financial impact in future. Every packaging from 2030 onwards placed in the EU must be at least 70% recyclable. Yeah. Now, how do you define 70% recyclable? We don't know yet. There will be a delegated act coming in 2028, and that delegated act will give a guideline how to calculate recyclability. You don't really have to wait until 2028 because there are also existing methodologies, existing standards that can be used to get a really good understanding that if my packaging is recyclable or not. But this article is extremely crucial because if a packaging is not 70% recyclable, cannot enter the market. If it is just 70% recyclable and not 90% or 100% recyclable, then it would have a disadvantage through eco-modulated EPR fees. So I'm pretty sure that all of us know what extended producer responsibility is. And this EPR fees is going to be connected with the recyclability of packaging in future. That's why higher the recyclability, bigger the benefit in EPR. So this is the article which directly has a financial impact on our business. Article number 7, minimum recycled content in plastic packaging. So only focused on plastic packaging. If you look at the numbers that how much recycled content should be there, the numbers are not so high, but the implementation is extremely difficult in certain cases. So minimum recycled content for PET beverage bottles, this is doable because PET is a closed loop system. It's very easy to get high quality recycled PET that is ideal for food contact applications, also for non-food contact applications. But when we focus on polyolefins, especially food contact, big challenge, because today it's not allowed. So EFSA has not allowed for post-consumer polyolefinic waste to go back in direct food contact application. And there is a 10% recycled content requirement for such kind of packaging challenge. Another challenge would be that is there sufficient recycling capacity in Europe from where I can source the recycled materials? Big question, right? So this is something that is also going to be heavily discussed in the next weeks at, let's say, at the events in PRSE Amsterdam, EFAT, that the recycling capacity in Europe is shrinking. And in 2030, we need high amounts of recycled materials, high quality recycled materials that can go in packaging. So how will that be implemented? Article number 8, article number 9, I will not go in too much detail, but let's say article 8 is I can use bio-based raw materials, let's say agriculture waste, and based on those agriculture waste, I can generate plastics, and those plastics can go in the packaging. Article number 9, compostable packaging is going to impact the tea, coffee industry significantly. I had the possibility of connecting with a major coffee producer who are currently using aluminum and, let's say, plastics in their coffee capsules. And this is going to be a challenge because in future, those kind of packaging must be compostable. Right? Article number 10, extremely relevant for all of us, minimization of packaging. Yeah. Whenever we are using packaging with thick walls, we are using false bottoms, or we are using, let's say that's Article 24 part of it, or we are using transport packaging with a high empty volume ratio. These kind of packaging are are really high in volumes, and they needs to be minimized in future. So this is also going to impact us in 2030, Article number 10. Article 11, reusable packaging, we'll go in detail. And Article 12, labeling of packaging. So labeling of packaging comes in 2028. This labeling of packaging, we'll have to ensure behind every packaging that is placed on the market so that the user is able to identify that, okay, this packaging is made up of this material and it should ideally go in that bin. So right now there is no methodology that how the labeling of packaging should be done, but there is already a draft, or let's say a recommendation from the JRC, the Joint Research Commission of the EU, suggesting that how labeling of packaging can be made. They've already given suggestion that labeling of packaging should not be based on the bin. So in Germany, we have the yellow bag, we have the blue bins, and then the glass bin. In Netherlands, there's a PMD, blue bags. In Denmark, it's something else. So they've already recommended that we don't write the bins behind the packaging, that this packaging should go in the yellow bag or in the blue bin. Instead, the packaging should be with the material, that this packaging is made up of this material, this packaging is made up of that material. Yeah, nothing is concrete yet, but it will be. Yeah. And then the last article, EU DOC. That's where we'll go in depth. Okay, so PPWR obligations for 2026, like we discussed, we are today only focusing on 2026. Lots of articles here are not coming in place in 2026. They're still relevant, like recyclability of packaging is very relevant, although it's not coming in 2026. And if you already realize that some of the other packaging that you're placing on the market is, let's say, can be minimized in future, or needs to go in compostability, then it's good to start working on it already. So article number 5. This article is going to impact all types of packaging placed on the market because of the heavy metal restrictions. Yeah. So this article is very focused on substances of concern. So target is to reduce or avoid the use of any concerning substances in packaging. These are divided into 2 categories. First category is heavy metal concentration. Second category is PFAS concentration. PFAS is focused on food packaging only. Heavy metals is applicable for food and non-food. So practically all the packagings out there. Now there are 4 heavy metals that have been identified, which you see at the bottom here. So lead, cadmium, mercury, hexavalent, and chromium. No, I have not said it in the same order, but these are the 4 heavy metals that have been identified, and the sum of these 4 heavy metals that should not cross 100 milligrams per kilogram. If we say that my packaging doesn't have any heavy metals at all, that also needs some kind of proof. So I need to prove, number 1, that if I'm using one or all 4 of these heavy metals, then the combined concentration is below the prescribed concentration. If I'm saying that I'm not using any of these heavy metals, then also I need to prove that there's no heavy metal present in my packaging. Point number 2 is PFAS concentration. PFAS is very specific to food contact application. It is, let's say, heavily discussed in the last years, especially from France, who actually wanted to ban PFAS in packagings. And now with the PPWR, it is very clear that there cannot be any food contact packaging placed on the market if the PFAS exceeds the specified limit. And you see the limits here in parts per billion and parts per million, depending on the type of, let's say, PFAS testing which has been conducted. The testing of PFAS is very tough to understand, and this also we'll discuss very shortly. There has been also a guidance, PPWR guidance document, which recently was published from the EU. This guidance document has tried to give more clarity towards Article 5, especially that how should the testing happen, how to identify. The reality is that there are not enough institutes that can actually test PFAS or heavy metals. There is not enough time. If we check from, I think Julia said there are 119 days or 116 days until 12th August. So there's not enough time to test all the packaging from all the companies in the EU for PFAS and heavy metals. And it will be a very huge commercial, let's say, commercial aspect you will have to consider if you test every packaging. So there's lots of unclarity in Article 5, but this article is going to significantly impact us in the next 3 months. These 2 points, heavy metals and PFAS, is in addition to any other chemical safety rule. So it's not replacing any existing rules, it's on top of any existing chemical safety rules. Yeah, both of them have to be documented to go through the EU conformity declaration. Now, where is heavy metals used? So we are still at Article 5. The question is, am I using heavy metals or not? How can I identify? From visual inspection, you can't, right? But in general, heavy metals are used as pigments, stabilizers, additives to provide color, durability, corrosion resistance, and heat stability, right? So some general applications are printing inks, dyes, in glass packaging, there can be lead, then in plastic master batches, and also in recycled plastics, there is a chance that they can be heavy metals. There are certain exemptions also. If you want to understand what are the exemptions or for recycled plastics, how to ensure that there's no heavy metals, glad to come in a separate discussion. But let's say the PPWR has also given some restrictions, which is currently in the draft version. So that's why there is a way that you can identify that, okay, if I'm using very bright colors, if I'm using certain types of packaging, there might be a risk of having heavy metals in the packaging. In that case, definitely get it checked as soon as possible. PFAS. So PFAS is very complicated. So PFAS is primarily used for grease proofing, water resistance. If I'm not wrong, it's also known as the forever chemical because it just doesn't wash away or go away. They are considered as a huge threat to hygiene, to health, and that's why there is a big focus on PFAS. Where is it generally used? Fast food packaging. So we have these butter papers, butter wraps, burger wraps, all these kind of, let's say, buttery feeling on the fast food packaging. That's where there are high chances of PFAS contamination. Bakery products, molded fibers, popcorn bags, these are just some of the examples, right? I believe that companies working in food packaging are already aware if you're using PFAS or not. And PFAS is definitely one of the big focus in Article 5. So it's good to start working on it as soon as possible. The next article, which is relevant for 2026, is article number 11. So we are right now only focusing on 2026. Article 11 is for reusable packaging. And in our experience, or we are working with the companies, and in our experience, we have seen that there are not so many sales packaging which are actually in reusable format. There can be exceptions with, let's say, the coffee cups and some bowls in service packaging, which are in reusable format. But so far, we have not seen so many reusable packagings in the market. Where is reusable packaging to be seen? In transport packaging. So when you have EU pallets, when you have these Euro pallets, sorry. So these kind of pallet systems, when they are in a closed loop system, when they're in an open loop system within your company or with an external partner, with transport companies, that's where the reusable packaging comes into force. You know? The target of Article 11 is to identify that, okay, if I say that my packaging is reusable, how am I proving that this is actually reusable? No? So there has to be a qualitative description that it's reusable. There needs to be certain criteria must be fulfilled by this packaging, and this all needs to be documented. Right? So this is the focus of Article 11. Reusable packaging system. So let's say if we look at the complete life cycle, so it goes from collection, transportation, there can be cleaning, there cannot be cleaning depending on the type of packaging. So for Euro pallets, there won't be any cleaning involved, quality checks, redistribution. That's what we have to ensure in a reusable packaging system. General applications, what you'll see is in the beverage sector. So for example, these beverage bottles, whether it's glass, it can also be PET refillable beverage bottles. These are in reusable systems. The plastic crates, kegs, these are also in reusable system. So there needs to be proper documentation and proof that this packaging is actually in reuse. In HoReCa sector, like I mentioned, there are some service packaging, which is in reusable packaging. E-commerce and transport, that's where we see high number of cases with reusable, and then industrial B2B. Now we come on the part which is extremely crucial for 12th August 2026. Yeah, so going back. So from these articles, if we looked at which articles are relevant, Article 5 for 2026, Article 11 for 2026, and 39. Yeah. These are the three articles which are going to be extremely important for this year. Great. So now the question is, what is the EU Declaration of Conformity? Because this term is coming for the first time. This never existed for packaging before, but the concept is not new. The concept actually comes from the CE packaging. The CE conformity. So if you just look at here, the inspiration actually comes from CE. So if you have worked with CE before, you know that whenever you see a CE mark, then it's a confirmation that this product has followed certain sets of regulation. And the same concept is now coming for packaging, that every packaging must have a EU Declaration of Conformity, and this DOC is actually a confirmation that this packaging has followed the PPWR. Yeah. Right now, we don't need to put a mark, not a CE mark on the packaging or a DOC mark on the packaging. In future, through labeling requirements, maybe there has to be, let's say, digital carriers or QR codes which have to be put on every packaging, explaining that this packaging has followed the PPWR. But we'll get more clarity on this in the next few months. What is special about DOC is that it applies to all types of packaging. It is not just for sales packaging. It applies to sales, transport, e-commerce, primary production packaging, grouped packaging, right? So it applies to all types of packaging, and it is applicable to all packaging placed on the EU market. So it is not just specific to one country. It is for all the countries, one EU DOC. Yeah. This is a formal legal declaration. So it's not just a document, it's actually a declaration. Then it has to be compliant as per PPWR. So the documentation must have a proper format as described in the PPWR, and it must cover Article 5 to 12. Depending on the year, whichever article is in force, that needs to be part of the EU DOC. One of the questions I really like is, what happens if I don't have EU DOC? What happens? So on 12th August 2026, I don't think anything happens, because on that day, no one is coming to check exactly on that day that, okay, is there an EU DOC or not? What will happen is that in the next months after 12th August 2026, you will be asked from your customers, which could be, if you're in B2B, which could be retailers, supermarkets, that I want to understand that the packaging coming on the market is actually having a EU DOC. Some of the supermarkets, retailers have already started asking that right now. So you will need to have an EU DOC for your customers in B2B. For auditing, it will be extremely important that all the data is there, because audits might and will happen. I say might and will in the same sentence, because there is still unclarity that how is it going to happen, but there is no unclarity that if it is going to happen. So that's why when the audit process starts, then these EU DOC technical documentations and all supporting documents might be checked. Maybe they are checked on a batch-wise process, that let's say from 100 packaging data, only one packing is picked up, or what's the exact process, not defined. But when this audit happens, then I must have all the data required with me. And if I don't have it, then I risk fines, product recalls, and market bans. Yeah, there is a certain time period of 10 days when the packaging, when the EU DOC should be made available to the authorities on request. Yeah, so it's a legal permission, one EU DOC valid across all member states. There's no requirement to create 27 EU DOC for different member states. Yeah. And this will be a major requirement from the authority. The first step towards creating EU DOC, or the first step towards your PPWR compliance, is identification of your role and obligation. Yeah. Now, the regulation is, I would say that the regulation is made by policymakers who might not be coming from the packaging industry, and that's why the terminologies used in the regulation sometimes do not reflect the commercial terminologies that we use. Yeah. The best example here is the manufacturer. Manufacturer in PPWR is anyone who has their brand, logo, trademark on the packaging. That company becomes a manufacturer. So if I'm just putting my brand on the packaging and then I'm selling this product, I become the manufacturer, although I might not actually be the packaging manufacturer. No, so that's where the confusion starts. But manufacturer is the most crucial economic operator in PPWR, because this manufacturer has the central duty of creating all the EU DOCs, having all the technical documentations, along with the supporting documentations and the proofs. No, so let's say the test reports and drawings and specifications for every packaging. Yeah. So manufacturer plays a crucial role, and manufacturer is anyone with the brand, logo, trademark on the packaging. In certain cases, let's say when we go in depth on private label, when we go in transport packaging, then they really have to be checked case per case. Yeah. So understanding if you're a manufacturer or not, very important. Importer becomes the second most important economic operator, because if you're importing packaging from outside the EU in the EU, then it's your indirect responsibility to ensure that that packaging is having full conformity. Yeah, because no authority is going to go to, let's say, Asia or US or South America to check if those companies have fulfilled the responsibility or not. They're going to come to companies based here. No? So the importer becomes very important and will get audited for those kind of packagings. Yeah. So I'm not going into each and every economic operator. This is just to give you an understanding that this is the first step towards compliance, understanding your role and obligation. Yeah. Distributor, let's say distributor based in the EU, final distributor, retailer, from the name it sounds that it's, let's say, the company who's then selling directly B2C. Yeah, fulfillment service providers are such as Amazon is one of the examples on certain cases as fulfillment service provider. And the last, not the least, is supplier. Supplier plays a crucial role for all the other 5 economic operators, because without a supplier, you will not have the data and the documents required to create an EU DOC. Yeah. But the supplier will not get audited by the, let's say, by PPWR auditors, because a supplier is not directly placing the packaging on the market. Yeah. So just to repeat again, Manufacturer, highest responsibility, then importer, and then it goes on. Supplier must provide information to the manufacturer, but supplier will likely not get audited because it's the manufacturer's responsibility to place the right packaging with the right quality on the market. That's why the supplier, although plays a crucial role here, that's where you have to put efforts to get the right data, to get the right documentations. And if you're working with outside EU suppliers, then it's a good time to start already. Or I would say that good time was to start in March already to coordinate with the suppliers. Okay, so now we are going to EU DOC and technical documentations. Coming to suppliers, because we see supplier as one of the major hurdles in going through the EU DOC. So we'll be discussing later that from our process, the EU DOC gets created super fast, fully automatized. Input information, if that's good, then let's say the output information super automatized. The challenge comes when the supplier don't understand what type of data is required, or the supplier resists in providing the data. In that case, what you have to remind the supplier is that according to the Article 16, Article 16 is information obligations of suppliers of packaging. The supplier must provide manufacturers with all information and documentation necessary to demonstrate the conformity and the regulation. This includes supporting documentations as specified in the Annex 7. So the supplier must provide this information to the manufacturer. Question is not if the supplier will supply or not. Question is how long will it take for the supplier to understand, identify the type of missing data, the type of documents required, and then supplying it to you, right? So that's where, let's say, supplier documentation is a major challenge that we are seeing right now, especially with suppliers who are not well aware of the regulation. Yeah. Second point is that the documentation provided from the supplier must be in one or more languages that is easily understood by the manufacturer. So supplier is supposed to, I think there's a standard practice. English in general is the language that we are seeing. In either paper or electronic format, of course, electronic format is the preferred way here. For contact sensitive packaging, whatever additional documentations are required under other union legal acts should also be provided by the supplier. So if the supplier is already providing food contact conformity and such documentations, then this is also part of, let's say, part of the whole process. Now, how does the technical documentation process run on our platform, or how do we suggest it? Number one, we say that the supplier responsibility is on data generation and provision. So material composition and specifications, technical reports and evidences, they must be provided by the supplier for the upcoming articles. Yeah. Very likely some of the partial, or let's say partial data is already available with the manufacturer, with the brand owner, that can already be provided, and whatever data is missing must be provided by the supplier. Once this basic data is available, so the column number 1 is available, then the next part is following the Annex 7, which is the technical documentation. That's where the general description of packaging is required, the intended use, let's say food contact, non-food contact, single use, reusable packaging, what are the types, that is the application. Then the specifications, technical drawings, bill of materials is optional, test reports and standards. So how am I proving that I'm following certain articles? So there needs to be some test reports, and if I followed some certain standards for lab testing, for manufacturing testing, manufacturing process testing, then those standards need to be declared. If column 1 and column 2 is completed, then you move on to column number 3, which is then the creation or verification of the EU DOC. Now, depending on the role, so if you're a manufacturer or a brand owner, then you're creating the EU DOC. If you're not, then you're verifying that there is an EU DOC supplied to you by your, let's say, in that case by your supplier or customer, depending on the supply chain. So in short, there's a lot to do before 12th August 2026. I would still say that we have over 3 months, so there's still time to take action. It always depends, really. The bottleneck would be suppliers. If you're very dependent on suppliers for information, it's a good time to start. How do we suggest to proceed? We say do it smart and digital, right? So now coming to what we do at PackIntelX and how do we propose to proceed. So our smart solutions is where we propose understand the regulation first, right? That if there are certain points which are unclear in the regulation, then there are ways to understand it. If you want to make a roadmap that, okay, 2026 targets, Article 5 and 11, this is what you focus on until August. And then after August, what to do, to be ready for the other parts of the regulation. So a timeline, a roadmap. Yeah. Or if you say that my suppliers are, let's say I have over 30 suppliers, over 20 suppliers who really need to understand what needs to be done today, for 2026, then supplier training or data gathering, data preparation for EU DOC. So these are the parts that we cover. It can be workshops, which are very tailored for specific to the companies. It can be consultations. Let's say you already know from webinars, from white papers that what is PPWR, great. And if you just have a few understanding questions that for this packaging, am I the manufacturer or not? For that transport packaging, am I at all under obligation or not? Then this can be covered through consultations. Supplier training is something that we recommend for especially suppliers who are based, let's say I don't want to name countries, but suppliers who are not based in countries very active in regulations. So that's where we propose it. And data preparation is something that if you're using a PIM system, an ERP system, then you must have the data. If you're not using those, or if you don't have sufficient data inside, then this is something that needs to be done. These are some of, let's say, what our participants and customers have given as feedbacks, that because we are not, let's say, just a digital company, we are all coming from packaging side. We have a different way of thinking. We look from long-term perspective, and then we get positive feedback from companies that, what is a realistic scenario. We don't just say that what needs to be done in the regulation, but what actually is the right way to proceed from a commercial aspect also. Then coming to our integrated digital data management platform. So part one is understanding the regulation, coordinating with the suppliers. Part number two is doing the, let's say, digital management of data, for getting the EU DOC part. Step number one is bulk data import. So we have the possibility to import data using API. So you can connect SAP, other PIM systems, other ERP systems, Oracle, such systems directly using API, and the data gets transferred. Second possibility is using Excel. So we provide Excel templates. You can also use your own Excel template. There we define that what are the necessary data which must be there and what are the optional data. Always remember that for EU DOC technical documentation, the amount of data required is not so high. If you want to target in future recyclability, packaging minimization, and EPR, then better to provide a bit more data in the beginning, so that you're not just doing one part of the regulation, but in future you have the possibility of covering all the parts of the regulation for companies to decide. Third part, of course, is manual entry. Type of data we are looking for, packaging data. So very basic packaging data as required in the Annex 7 and Annex 8 for the EU DOC. If you go in recyclability, if you go in EP, or let's say recyclability especially, then we need more detailed material specific data, material and composition and design specific data. Second part is packaging management. So once the packaging data, supplier data is on the platform, the step number two is how to manage that packaging, let's say specifications, drawings, materials, so they all can be easily imported on the platform and assigned that this is the packaging data, this is the specification for this packaging, this is the technical drawing for this packaging, and this all will be attached later in the EU DOC. Step number 3 is role definition. This needs to be done before you come on the platform. You have to know that what exactly is the role. That's why the first step for us is good understanding of PPWR. And if you know that, okay, for these packaging I'm the manufacturer, for these I'm the importer, let's say the process is very simple then. Role definition, packaging definition is if my packaging is food contact, non-food contact, single use, reuse. If step number 3 is completed, then you see the obligations automatically generated. So what is your obligation from Article 5 to 12? Sorry. Now we are going to the creation of EU DOC on the digital platform. Yeah. So this was data integration, that what type of data is required in the beginning. And now this is the process for creating the EU DOC. Yeah. So the first step is data management. So importing and structuring all the relevant packaging data as central foundation. What that means also is, if let's say you are putting, I'm taking an example of a PET bottle, let's say for soft drinks. One packaging bottle is 330 ml, second bottle is 500 ml, third bottle is 1 liter. Yeah, all using the same material, same supplier, same composition, only the volume is changing. In that case, I don't have to create 3 EU DOC. I can identify them as one identical packaging format, and then I create EU DOC and all technical documentation for all these 3 combined. This the platform does automatically based on certain inputs that we have given after a lot of learning. So we are learning constantly that how to make the life easy for data management, and then now we have the possibility of grouping different packagings which are identical together. So this is data management. Second part is supplier integration. Whatever data has not been provided by the owner can be given by the supplier. Also possible that the owner means, let's say the brand owner or the manufacturer says that I don't want to do anything with data. I just invite all my suppliers and the suppliers will provide all the data. Also possible. So we have a very strong supplier portal there. Point number 3 is connecting the supplier with the data. So which supplier is supplying what types of packaging, let's say whatever status information is missing from each supplier, that is then linked internally. If something is not linked with the information that you have provided, then you have to do it manually. In very rare cases, it happens that a company is not doing bulk data import using API or Excel and is actually doing manual entries. Okay. Step number 4 is this is automatic generation of technical documentation. So if the supplier integration is optional, because if you say that you have all the information required, you don't have to invite the suppliers. So if data management, data linking and structuring is completed, then technical documentations are generated automatically. EU DOC is generated automatically, and all you have to do is digital signature. So putting a summary to the digital process, number 1, dynamic identification of obligations. Number 2, automatized technical documentation creation. 3, strong supplier portal, where your suppliers can give partial information, complete information. You have full overview of what the supplier is doing. Number 4, bulk operations, extremely important. If you want to sign all the documents together, if you want to delete everything together, bulk operations, extremely critical. And last point is automatized generation of EU DOC and sharing the EU DOC with your customers. So we want to avoid that email exchanges happen again and again, because if you start downloading EU DOCs and then start sending via email to other B2B customers, lots of work. What we have is a possibility that you can just share a link of the EU DOCs, so multiple packagings which you're supplying to, let's say, retailer A. So we just share a link with retailer A. Retailer A comes on the platform and then sees the EU DOC for the packaging that you're supplying to that particular customer. Next steps. So next steps as in what we would recommend now in the next 3 months time is combine expertise and digitalization. Number one is identify your role, your obligations with a comprehensive roadmap. Role is extremely critical because your role defines your obligations. Roadmap is something you can define, because if you say my target is just this year and I'll take care of 2028 later, also good to go, but roles and obligations critical. Point number two, analysis of packaging portfolio and guidance for suppliers. Supplier are going to be the bottleneck where everything is going to get stuck. Digital side works very fast and very automatized. Let's say the information that you have on your PIM system, ERP systems, Excel also goes quite fast. Suppliers are the bottleneck, and there needs to be a really good communication. And then the last point is the digital data management and the EU DOC. Yeah. I think, Julia, with that, I have stuck really to the time. Just one or two more points. As we are discussing today the EU DOC and you've discussed PPWR and the whole process, if you really want to see how the process works, then why not see it with your packaging data? So what we invite all the companies is, if you have 3, 4, 5 packaging sample data, right? It can be your packaging data. You can also create some sample data. Then you can just share it with us, and we show you how within a few clicks you generate the EU DOC and the technical documentations, right? If you feel that there is some or the other point which is unclear on PPWR and you want to get an understanding of it, whether it's consultations, workshops, then glad to come in touch, right? And we'll be present at Interpack, where we'll be giving out a complete, let's say, a generic roadmap. So a complete timeline and understanding that what is going to happen in the next year from our perspective. So if you're at the Interpack, feel free to come by for a drink and then also for the roadmap. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Siddharth. That was very clear and very practical in your presentation. I have selected some questions. We have received a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I cannot address them all, but I have 2 regarding the conformity declaration and 2 regarding supplier obligations. So I think these are very good questions. So first one is, does the declaration of conformity need to be prepared per unit of sales? For example, a T-shirt with polybag and swing tag, or separately for each individual packaging component?
EU DOC needs to be created for one packaging unit. No, it's very crucial to define a unit. There's something that we do on our platform that we define. I'll take another example. Let's say that if I'll go back to my Pepsi or Coca-Cola example, that if I have if I have bottle, label, and cap, and if I want to generate the EU DOC, I'm not generating EU DOC for individual components, right? So I'm putting them together as a unit, and then I'm creating one EU DOC, yeah, for the packaging unit. But in certain cases, it's also important to understand that are they really together one packaging unit? Let's say if you have a label hanging out of a T-shirt or of a polythene bag, is the polythene bag and the label really one unit? No? So in those cases, we go then a bit more in understanding of the product's portfolio, and then we say that, okay, is that one unit or not? The identification of units will happen automatically on the platform if the required data is already given.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So next question is, do companies that produce only components, not final products, and supply exclusively to other manufacturers need to prepare a declaration of conformity for their packaging, even if the packaging is used solely for transport purposes?
So I'm just giving the answer based on the brief information I have, right? So don't take it as the final answer. If let's say you're just creating one component and supplying it to another B2B company who's assembling different components together to make the final packaging unit, in that case, you are a supplier of packaging. So in that case, you are not a manufacturer of packaging. Whenever a brand logo trademark comes on the packaging, that company with that brand logo trademark becomes the manufacturer. In case of transport packaging, carton boxes, pallets, shrink films, which do not have any brand labels on them, that's where we have to understand the supply chain, and then we define that what exactly is the role of this packaging. Transport packaging is I would say is one critical packaging that needs to be understood. Now, sales packaging easy to identify. Can we take 1-2 more questions? I can see there over 30 questions.
Yeah, I have 2 more. I think two will be good. So now we go into more the supplier obligations. How does Article 16, which is the information obligations of suppliers of packaging or packaging materials, apply to suppliers outside the EU? It has no jurisdiction there, I assume, and therefore we cannot use that as a leverage to get data.
I would say, so first, really good point. And second is whether the supplier is in the EU or outside the EU. Like I said, you cannot, the suppliers will not be audited. So you cannot use the scary factor saying that you will be audited if you don't provide the data. No? So in that case, the leverage is number one, that if the data is not given by the suppliers, then the packaging cannot be placed on the market. This is more a pressure on you than on the suppliers. But the suppliers will have to comply with PPWR because they are not just supplying to you, they are also supplying to other companies who are placing the packaging on the market, and they will understand that this needs to be followed also for the next at least 10 years. So I think strong supplier coordination, good training to the suppliers is the key here. We are not asking for extremely complex data. What we are just asking for is transparency on the data. Also something that we support with.
Okay, and let's take one more regarding the data that is shared. Is a supplier obliged to provide detailed information on the composition of its packaging to customers, even if this information is confidential? Or is it such detailed data only required to be disclosed to authorities in the context of audits?
Also a good question. Here, let's say, glad to come in a separate discussion to understand really what do you mean by the supplier, because in a supply chain, let's take an example again of the PET bottle, of the Coke or Pepsi bottle. If I'm the supplier of the cap, and I'm supplying it to the bottle, let's say to another B2B company who's assembling the bottle, cap, label, everything together, putting the product, which is likely Coca-Cola in that case. So that company is the manufacturer. So I'm a supplier of the cap, and I have to provide all the information, detailed material composition and everything to that brand owner. But if I'm manufacturing something for private label, so let's say I'm a cosmetics company, I make a perfume bottle, and now I'm selling it to a retailer, and the retailer wants to label it as their private label. In that case, I have to be careful that what information am I sharing, and that's something that you have to define together with the retailer, because you don't want to share all the information you have on all the business secrets in that case with the retailer. So very important to understand what do you mean by the supplier in this case. Any other questions that we can address, Julia?
Yeah, there are lots of questions, but unfortunately the time is not allowing to go deeper. I have also a question for you as our audience. So it would be very nice if you would take this poll again for us. We would like to know what would be most helpful for you as a next step. So would it be a live demo or more detailed information even? So I guess most of you still require more information. Okay, so maybe we will have to do another webinar on that. But still, no matter where you stand today, I hope this session helped you make the conformity declaration process more practical and actionable, and gave you a clear idea what it takes to manage it at scale. And if you would like to see how this works in practice, as we already said, we would be very happy to show you the platform live and discuss your specific setup and requirements and also challenges. So feel free to reach out to us directly. And also one quick note on Interpack. We will be exhibiting there in Düsseldorf from 7th to 13th May. So come visit us in Hall 7A. And there we will also present how to implement the upcoming mandatory information requirements for producers. So from draft August onwards, manufacturers have several specific obligations regarding contact information and address that needs to be on your packaging to ensure the contactability and accountability. And this can be very challenging for certain packaging formats, especially for small packaging. And we will present an efficient and scalable way how to do that. So yeah, we would be glad to welcome you at Interpack. And if you are looking for more information regarding PPWR in general, also check out our website, follow us on LinkedIn, register for our newsletter, and we will be providing a lot of helpful information on also upcoming new delegated acts, and we are looking into all developments regarding PPWR and share it with our customers. So thank you very much for your time today and have a great day.
Thank you. Wish you a nice afternoon. Bye.